once the tap is turned off, it's over. But you need the political will to turn the tap off, and to get that political will, we need people informed and we need people organized. Thanks to you, millions of people around the world are being informed on this issue, and thanks to fluoride-free Texas, thousands of people in the city of Austin are being informed about the issue and being organized on the issue. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that Austin, Texas will be our next big victory. A few days ago, it was finalized that Calgary in Alberta, that's 1.1 million people, are now going to be fluoride-free, and after 20 years. And people in Waterloo, Ontario, voted it out. So the squeeze is on Ontario. And don't forget that most of British Columbia and most of Quebec, the wings of Canada, are already fluoridation-free. And we're squeezing on Alberta with Calgary out, Edmonton may be next, and then we're squeezing on Ontario. If Ontario was to go, if Toronto was to go, or even Ottawa was to go, I think it would be the end of fluoridation in Canada. Meanwhile, we've got a very good organizing group in New Zealand. FAN New Zealand is excellent, and FAN Australia has just been formed. So there's a fight back everywhere. And then a few days ago I was in Dublin, which is mandatory fluoridation. Because of American pressure back in the 1960s, Ireland has mandatory fluoridation. It's the odd man out in Europe. Only 3 countries in Europe have any fluoridation at all. England at 10%, Spain at 3%, and Ireland at 73%. But lots of people in Ireland don't want this fluoride in their water. But many other people don't know it's there.
Now, you've been talking about some of the big cities that are going fluoride-free. I've seen reports like towns outside Austin, like Lago Vista, having it removed. Other cities not putting it in. Big fights in places like San Diego, where they've had to bring in supposed private money to do it.
I've tried to work out for 15 years. You notice in our book, it's the last chapter, trying to understand motivations. Now, for the rank-and-file dentists and doctors, it's very simple. They're too busy treating patients to read the literature. Most of them don't. You've got a wonderful guy in Austin, Griffen Cole. He's a dentist. He has read the literature, and he's very much opposed to it. Very important man, Griffen Cole. But most dentists and doctors don't have time to read the literature. We do, of course, 3 professors here, retired professors at that. Then you've got the people in the middle of the bureaucracy. Basically, they are trained not to question policy. Policy is determined in Washington or in the...
It's like the military. They follow orders.
They follow orders, literally. And the CDC, remember, is in uniform. It's a uniform branch of the Department of Health and Human Services, CDC. They're in uniform. Surgeon General. Surgeon General. As you say, it's a chain of command. So don't expect the middle bureaucrats, don't expect the health officers in the cities to...
And then the big chemical companies, they lobby the politicians that give the orders to the bureaucrats, who give the orders to the unquestioning minions that then put it in our water, and meanwhile it's a pesticide. I mean, they had a guy in California a few months ago who went into a house that was being gassed to kill bed bugs. Yeah. He walked in, a homeless guy, for like a minute, and it killed him. And it killed him, and it said...
That's the same stuff. That's sulfurofluoride.
Yeah.
Been used, Vicane, been used for years to fumigate buildings.
So this is simple. He walked in seconds, was dead.
That's right.
And this is what they're pumping the food with. And you were talking about the numbers of what gets in white flour and things.
Yeah, the level in the flour that was being permitted by the EPA was 125 parts per million, and that flour, wheat flour, goes into dough, pizza dough, bread, cookies, cakes, and so on.
And there's no doubt that's to kill bugs. so you're eating something that's meant to kill bugs. Now, I'm no rocket scientist, but I mean, that's insane.
But the top of the chain of command, I went to the bottom, in the middle. What about the top? What's the motivation of these people in the Center of Disease Control, etc., Department of Health, Kathleen Sebelius? Why do they keep this going? For me, it's the fear of losing credibility. They have waxed lyrical so much for so long about this practice. I think they fear that if they lose fluoridation, they lose credibility. If they lose credibility, they lose the public's trust, which threatens other public health policies.
This is the same government that secretly injected black people with syphilis. Yeah. And now it's come out they were doing it in Latin America, and the atomic soldiers. I mean, these people have no credibility. And I agree with you, Doctor, at that level, at the top policy wonks, but they're taking orders from people like John P. Holdren and people he admired before him, who all wrote about putting things like this in the water to reduce fertility. And we know it reduces fertility. And we know that they see us as animals, as a scourge upon the earth. And that's what my film Endgame Blueprint for Global Enslavement covers, is their own statements. This is being done by design. I know you only stick with what, you know, the actual chemicals.
And I would make a distinction between the dentists and doctors out there who are usually very decent people.
They're compartmentalized.
Yeah, they do not. I don't think they have any notion other than what they've been told, that fluoridation is good for teeth and that it's perfectly safe. We have them on the ropes with the science. You know, the best study they've ever done on tooth decay in the United States, they looked at 39,000 children in 84 communities. And what did they conclude? That if a child had lived all its life in a fluoridated community compared with a child that lived all its life in a non-fluoridated community, there was a saving, average saving for 5 to 17-year-olds of 0.6 of one tooth surface out of over 100 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. And you have to say to yourself, is this world crazy? Are we doing all this to save 0.6 of a tooth surface? Are we going to threaten their brains, lower IQ, bone damage in adults, arthritis, lower thyroid function, all these possibilities to save 0.6 of one tooth surface? It doesn't make sense, does it?
So again, as you just saw in that Dr. Paul Connick clip, there are a lot of victories. The tide is beginning to turn. And of course, one of the cities he's been working with the most is right here in Austin. And we're joined now by two members of the Fluoride Free Austin. Laura Presley, she's a PhD in physical chemistry, and Dr. Griffen Cole, he's a dentist here in town. And they're going to tell us about some of the action that's been taking place right here in Austin. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Aaron, thanks. There's been a major change that's happened very recently. The supplier of the hydrofluorosilicic acid that Austin uses as their fluoride source and their fluoride chemical in the tap water, the supplier of the chemical changed their material safety data sheet as recently as May, the end of May. And I have looked at a lot of material safety data sheets in my career as a chemist, probably scores and scores of them. And I can say, honestly, I have never seen this type of health warning in a material safety data sheet. Do you want to read, would you like to read through that? Or?
Yeah, let's go over that. And that's important, of course, because this is the company that admittedly uses aluminum byproducts and industrial waste, really, that they put in so much of the water throughout the country. Now, we have a quote from that material data sheet here. It says, prolonged or repeated overexposure to fluoride compounds may cause fluorosis. Fluorosis is characterized by skeletal changes consisting of osteosclerosis, hardening or abnormal density of the bone, as well as osteomalacia, softening of the bones, and by mottled discoloration of the enamel of teeth if exposure occurs during enamel formation. Symptoms may include bone and joint pain and limited range of motion. And of course, fluoride is known to be a contributor to bone cancer, thyroid disorder, brain inflammation, even reduced sterility and fertility, kind of a common meme when we talk about these modern day chemicals and some of the agendas behind it. But again, the material data sheet's important because it's as good as an official admission right from the company that supplies the fluoride. And so tell us more about what this means.
So what's interesting about what you just read, and I'm going to repeat just one phrase, if exposure occurs during enamel formation. What that signifies, and when Fluoride Free Austin, when we first saw this, we were incredibly alarmed and actually glad that they admitted this. Most material safety data sheets are intended for this, the chemical workers at the plant, the chemical handlers who are handling these chemicals and putting them into the water supply. This warning specifically targets infants whose teeth are erupting, right, and young children who are having their secondary teeth come in. This is what's unusual about this. It is warning and alarming the user, which is the city of Austin and other cities in the United States that use this supplier, that children can be affected. This is unusual, and it is phenomenal because now we've taken this to our Austin City Council and said, you have been warned. You now have the duty to put this warning that you now have received from your supplier This warning needs to go on to our water bills, the end users, of citizens of Austin. And this can be used across the country to go, anybody can take this to their city council and say, look, this has recently changed. You are now basically liable. You need to warn downstream of your citizens. That's the impact of this.
Yeah, and of course there was the CDC warning earlier in January of this year, warning that young people could also be affected, recommending to lower it from 1.2 parts per million standard to a 0.7. But at the same time, we were talking about this earlier, there's so many commercial forms of bottled water targeted directly at babies. Can you tell us the impact of that, Dr. Cole?
Well, this really dovetails nicely with what you just mentioned, and it was actually Health and Human Services and the EPA who did the downgrading. So when you go down from 1.2 parts per million to 0.7, I think that was just a way to let people know, wow, they're getting way too much exposure. Yep. I still don't think it's enough, but at least it's a start that they're acknowledging that this fluorosis, which for years was called just a cosmetic effect, we now realize that's not true. This is a serious adverse effect. This is the physical thing that we see as human beings, but we can't see inside that the thyroid's being lowered, that the pineal gland's being affected, and all these other things you mentioned. So it's interesting that this came out. It's very timely. But the baby water, there's now several suits. In fact, there's one very recently against Nestle and Gerber because they were targeting on the bottles. It was saying, you know, good for healthy teeth and good for babies to drink, and that's not true. And in fact, even besides the CDC, organized dentistry actually now warns that you really shouldn't be feeding or making formula with tap water. Mm-hmm. So even the people that have been standing behind it for so long are now realizing, oh, you know, maybe we shouldn't do this.
Yeah, so is this going to put cities like Austin at a point of liability now that they're warning that it is dangerous? So if they continue to put in the fluoride, what will that mean?
I think that is a high probability. Now that they've warned the city has the duty, they have the information, and they have to pass that on.
Yeah, so Fluoride Free Austin has spoken with councils. I know they've had several presentations. Can you tell us about some of the things they've said, and do you think the tide's going to turn here in Austin? Because cities across the nation, as you know, have begun doing away with it or refusing to put it in.